This is the ceremony going on right now in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the 40 passengers and crew who died on board United Airlines Flight 93 about to get underway there. They're reading the names of the people who died. It's probably worth our remembering, too, that a Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to those who died at the site of the memorial. It will be presented as part of the ceremony here. It will be on display, I should say, at that National Memorial in that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Patrick Joseph Driscoll. Edward Porter Felt.
Joined now by Bruce DuPoit, host of News Talk, and the shows today, the programs blend sort of seamlessly because, frankly, it is not about us today. It is about the observances that are going on. We're just here sort of to, if you will, bridge the gaps in between. The services may get a little shorter with each passing year, but they don't get any easier. That's my immediate reaction.
Right, and the things that sort of struck me as you were talking, following the president's remarks, you could see him talking, interacting with the families and the other Pentagon personnel who were there. Oh,
and my uncle, Jeremy Logan.
Sorry about that. This is the live on-air transition. So, Dave, you were saying, you know, as you were talking following the president's remarks there at the Pentagon, as he and the First Lady interacted with people who had queued up to shake hands with the president and with Michelle Obama, you could see there were smiles, you could see there were light moments, and you know, this is obviously a solemn occasion, the memory and the observance of the hijacking of planes and the flying of planes into buildings and all the loss of life. And I thought it tied very, very strongly and very poignantly with what Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, said in his remarks about the mother who grieves for the loss of her child who perished on 9/11 and who has happy memories as well as the sorrow, and that's what it is to love. He said that we are somehow able to hold contradictory emotions within us at one time, and this as much as any moment you're likely to face in life sort of draws that seeming contradiction right to the present, right to the forefront.
I'm also struck too on something that I heard today, that at which it was said there are teenagers who are alive right now who were not alive when this terrible thing happened. And the value, I suppose, then is in the national observance of this day and the remembrance and the continuity of what makes this country a place of tradition and honor, is that we do pay great reverence to those who have died and what went before.
I read a Facebook post last night from a coworker here who's in his early 20s, and he talked very poignantly about how clearly he remembers being in his classroom at the time. And I did the quick math, he was in 6th grade. So this is becoming one of those things where your memory of it depends on where you were. Let's listen in now as the moment of silence takes place in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
My sweetheart, my daughter, Cece Ross Lyles. Hilda Marson.
Waleska Martinez. Nicole Carol Miller. Our brother, son, and nephew, Louis Joey Nackey II. Donald Arthur Peterson. Jean Hoadley Peterson.
Mark David Rothenberg. Christine Ann Snyder. John Talignani. Honor Elizabeth Wainio. And my sister, Debbie, United Airlines flight attendant, Deborah Ann Jacobs Welsh.
Please be seated. This memorial has been created through the combined efforts of many. Thank you to the volunteers, the members of this community, our neighbors and local businesses, and all who work with us on a daily basis. Also with us today are members of our Federal Advisory Commission, our nonprofit partner, the Friends of Flight 93 National Memorial, as well as local elected officials and representatives of our congressional delegation, including representatives of Senator Casey, Senator Toomey, Congressman Schuster, and Congressman Rothfuss. And a special thank you to Mrs. Toomey for joining us. You continue to be an advocate for this memorial. Thank all of you for being here and supporting us, not just on September 11th. Also with us is the Director Joe Pisarcik from the Office of Surface Mining and Reclamation, and our partners, the Department of Justice, both who helped us protect this ground and restore it. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has also been an important partner in many aspects of this memorial, from the state troopers who responded on September 11th to the agencies that help us every day. Our first speaker is the Honorable Tom Corbett, Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Governor Corbett will be followed by Mr. Gordon Felt, the President of the Families of Flight 93, who continue to be lasting champions of this memorial even 13 years later. Governor Corbett.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us here today. In addition to thanking the family for joining us here today and for the sacrifices of your family members, as I look out into the audience, I see a number of first responders, police officers, firemen, EMT, whose world changed across this country on that day on September the 11th. I also see a number of members of our military in uniform, and I'm sure many out of uniform. I'm sure many who were already over in the Mideast and have come back and are veterans now today. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for keeping us free. As you sit up here, yes, sir. As you sit up here or you walk these grounds, we are gathered in a place that at one time was a meadow, then it was a strip mine, then an empty hillside. And as you know, 13 years ago on this date, it became a new battlefield here in this country in the war on terror, though, as compared to other wars that we have fought here. Today, it is truly a monument and a place with trees, with granite, but with winds and memories. The places like this around our country, particularly here in Pennsylvania, from Gettysburg to Valley Forge, are places that have become shrines not because we worship war, but because we honor valor and those who fought there. Battlefields oftentimes become sacred spaces because they are where courage and honor were pushed aside fear, and where universal impulse for freedom and for dignity spoke louder than the voices of tyrants or terrorists or their actions. 40 people united in a single purpose took on the mantle of heroism and stopped the hand of evil before it could strike another blow against our nation in Washington, D.C. Some of the families are here. Others are here with us in spirit. This state and this nation are all here with us in spirit today at this point. I want to tell the families that we will never forget the bravery, the honor, and the value that was performed and exhibited by their loved ones. While they are lost in body, they are without a doubt shared in spirit of that heroism and devotion to our country. From whatever nation they may have come or whatever state they may have come, they are sons and daughters of Pennsylvania now. The grounds and the skies surrounding Flight 93 is where they rose up against oppressors and people who would like to continue to oppress us. It is now their home of a grateful state and truly of an awestruck nation. Our United States Capitol remains standing, remains a symbol around the world of the freedom that is preserved by the greatness of those 40 people who proved that in America there are no ordinary people. On behalf of Pennsylvania, I want to thank the families and thank all of you for not only coming here, but for sharing your loved ones with us. God bless our nation, and God bless our heroes. Thank you.
Good morning. Governor Corbett, Speaker Hastert, Regional Director Caldwell, distinguished guests, families, friends, and supporters of this beautiful memorial, we gather again this year to remember. It is always good to return to Somerset and reconnect with our local family that has shown such compassion throughout the years, and to offer thanks with gratitude to the National Park Service, the Flight 93 National Memorial Ambassadors, the friends of the Flight 93 National Memorial who work so tirelessly as stewards caring for the sacred ground and the memories of our loved ones. Without our Pennsylvania family and the commitment of time and resources provided for the construction of this memorial, we would not see the tremendous progress that has been made these past few years. 13 years ago, our lives were forever changed as our country experienced the horror of September 11th. As families, we continue to mourn the loss of loved ones. As a community and country, we are faced and forced to deal with a reality that has altered our way of life and forced a new reality upon us. though 13 long years have passed, I can vividly remember the emotion of the day, the loss of a loved one, and the fear and uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. Yet there's also a new post-September 11th generation among us today that only know of these events through the eyes of another or through the lens of a textbook. It is for this generation and those that follow that this memorial has been created. The significance of September 11th, the extraordinary actions of 40 men and women aboard Flight 93, and the stories of those heroes we honor today will be enshrined here upon completion of the Flight 93 National Memorial, available to all, our generation's gift to the future. In Washington, D.C., at the Capitol building, just off the rotunda, a massive plaque hangs in recognition of the sacrifice our loved ones made as they fought to retake control of a plane hijacked for the purpose of destroying the greatest symbolic pillar of our democracy. Across the country, in small towns and major cities, memorials have been dedicated to the passengers and crew members of United 93. Their story resonates with the people. It's a story of selflessness, courage, valor, and heroism, forever woven into the fabric of our great nation's history. Yesterday, I had the distinct privilege and honor to accept on behalf of the crew members and passengers of United Flight 93 a Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in a ceremony that took place in Emancipation Hall at the Capitol Visitor Center in Washington. The significance of this ceremony and its location were particularly poignant for our families in attendance and those members of Congress and staff that were in the Capitol on the morning of September 11, 2001. Since the American Revolution, Congress has commissioned gold medals as the highest expression of national appreciation for distinguished achievements and contributions. This award has been given to such distinguished recipients as George Washington, Sir Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa, and collectively to the Tuskegee Airmen and Native American Code Talkers. On December 23, 2011, the 112th Congress passed an act authorizing the fallen heroes of 9/11 Congressional Medal to be awarded to the memorials established at the three sites, honoring the men and women who perished as a result of the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001. The act states that the passengers and crew members of United Airlines Flight 93 recognized the imminent danger that Flight 93 posed to many innocent men and women and children, American institutions, and the symbols of American democracy, and took heroic and noble action to ensure that the aircraft could not be used as a weapon. Today, we present this medal to the National Park Service to care for it in perpetuity and have on permanent display at the Flight 93 National Memorial. At this time, I would like to call forward Michael Caldwell, Northeast Regional Director of the National Park Service, as well as two youth speakers who will comment upon the design of this memorial, or this medal. Emerson Glick, the daughter of Flight 93 passenger Jeremy Glick and his wife Liz. Emerson was born in June of 2001. And Nathan Bradshaw, the son of flight attendant Sandy Waugh Bradshaw and her husband Phil. Nathan was born in September of 2000. It is through the eyes of this next generation that we hope the lessons of the past do not fade away, so that history is not destined to repeat itself. Thank you.
One side of the Congressional Gold Medal awarded to the 40 passengers and crew of Flight 93 depicts that this rural Pennsylvania field where Flight 93 crashed on September 11, 2001. The design features an image of the sandstone boulder that marks the crash site and towering hemlock trees at the edge of the field. The medal is inscribed with these words: "A common field one day, a field of honor forever," and Act of Congress 2011.
The reverse of the Congressional Gold Medal features 40 stars on a raised border, representing the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93. and a Centennial Eagle clasping laurel branches. The medal depicts the western front of the U.S. Capitol. Above the dome of the Capitol is the inscription, "We honor the passengers and crew of Flight 93 who perished in a Pennsylvania field on September 11th, 2001. Their courageous action will be remembered forever."
Good morning. Thank you, Emmy and Nathan. I had the chance to spend part of the morning with both of them, and if this is our next generation, we are all in very good hands. And to Gordon and all the families, thank you for your commitment to making this memorial a reality. It was fitting that the Congressional Gold Medal was awarded yesterday in honor of the passengers and crew, who upheld our highest ideals and whose actions define courage. Joining us today are staff from the U.S. Mint who created the medal. We will display the medal for the coming days, but look forward to gathering again in 1 year when the medal will be displayed in the new visitor center, next to photographs of the 40 passengers and crew and remembrances of the lives that they led. Memorials are places of memory, of lives lived, but also of lives changed. Today, we also acknowledge those who have committed their lives to ensuring the passengers and crew of Flight 93 did not die in vain. We are honored to have with us agents of the FBI and law enforcement who scoured this site in an attempt to stop the next attack, and to this day, seek justice, including Brigadier General Mark Martins, U.S. Army Chief Prosecutor. Thank you for being here today, sir. Many lives were changed that day. When we discuss the 3 sites of the September 11th attacks, we do not speak of Shanksville, but rather the White House, or the terrorist's most likely target, the U.S. Capitol. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the gentleman who was presiding over the House of Representatives on September 11th, 2001, the second in line of succession to the president that day, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives from 1999 to 2007, the Honorable Dennis J. Hastert.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to share this memorial site and service with you. You know, that morning was a busy day in the U.S. Capitol. It's always a busy day in the Capitol when the Congress is in and things were happening, but it happened to be a day that we had the Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard, to come to give a joint session of Congress. And we had morning session as usual and started early that day so that we could clear out the mundane business of Congress before we closed down the House floor and swept it so that the speech from John Howard could be proceeded at 11 o'clock that morning. I was in my office early. I had a meeting that Monday afternoon with the President of the United States. I knew he was going to be out of town the next day or several days, so we had to get that meeting out of the way. But I was in my office about 7:30 in the morning, and I had several appointments, and all of a sudden there was a knock on my door, and somebody stepped in and said, "Mr. Speaker, something happened in New York. Either a small plane or a helicopter went into one of the World Trade Towers, and there's a pretty bad fire." And I said, "I'll be upstairs in a second." And as I walked into my office and looked at the TV set, just in time to see the second plane go into World Trade Tower. And I know this is not an accident. This is something we don't know who's perpetrating this, but certainly an act of terror on the United States of America. So the next thing I do, I'm thinking we have a joint session of Congress. A joint session of Congress is when you have the House and the Senate all in the same room. You have the Supreme Court, you have the President's Cabinet, you have the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you have a good part of the Ambassador's Corps. Virtually you have the whole government of the United States in one room. And I'm thinking this is not a very good idea. And so I tried to get a hold. I knew the President was out
country. I knew he was in a classroom in Pennsylvania, in Florida, and was whisked out of there. I'm trying to get a hold of Vice President Cheney, who at that moment was in the floor or the basement of the White House with the Secretary of Transportation, Norm Mineta, trying to get all the planes, virtually every plane, every commercial plane, every private plane, out of the air and on the ground at one time, which is a monumental task. And not just in this country, but planes coming from Europe, planes coming from Asia, planes coming from South America, to get them grounded. And I'm trying to get a hold of the Vice President because I didn't want to snub the government of Australia by canceling the speech of their Prime Minister, and want to make sure that there's coordination between the White House and the Congress. But ironically, I couldn't get a hold of Vice President Cheney. I have a secure phone on my left-hand side of my desk in my office. I had a red phone that I got most of my calls on the right-hand side of my desk. But the secure phone, you had to punch some numbers and turn a key, and Vice President had to do the same thing, and we just weren't making connections. And all of a sudden, the light lit up on my red phone, and I thought, well, they're putting the Vice President through on this other phone. And I pick it up, and I said, good morning, and the voice on the other side says, what's going on up there? The taxes are too high, and I don't like what you're doing in immigration, and on and on and on. And I said, who is this? He said, never mind who this is. Who in the heck is this? I said, I think you have the wrong number, and I hung up. And as I looked up, my desk faces out the front window of the U.S. Capitol, and if you know, the west front has the portico. All across that portico was the front of my office. And I'm looking down the mall of the Capitol as I'm hanging the phone. I see this black smoke just curling across the mall. And I know, that's not supposed to be there. We don't make a lot of smoke in Washington. Sometimes smoke and mirrors, but not a lot of smoke. And so I call up my gentleman who runs my office. I said, Sam, the smoke's not supposed to be there. Find out what happened. And he came back a minute later and said, there's a plane that went into the Pentagon. And I'm thinking, this is war. We're a sitting duck on this hill. There's 5,000 people that work in this Capitol. There's 500 members, roughly, of Congress, both the House and the Senate. We have interns, we have pages, we have visitors. We are a target. And so I couldn't get a hold of anybody in the Senate. They weren't quite there that time of the morning. So I unilaterally decided to close down Congress, and I make a phone call to the gentleman who's presiding, Speaker Pro Tem, happened to be a fellow by the name of Porter Goss, represented Southwest Florida, later became the head of the CIA. And I picked up the phone and I said, Porter, we're going to bring the gavel down, and I want to bring the chaplain in to say a prayer. I thought that was the appropriate thing. And so I'm waiting for the chaplain. I walk across Statuary Hall, and we're walking into the chamber of the House, and I'm following the chaplain. And as I walk in, two of my security fellows, and they're pretty good guys, pretty big guys. I was not small myself. And one, played linebacker for the University of Maryland, so they were ample. And grabbed me, and virtually my feet were off the ground and moved me out of the chamber. I said, what's going on? He said, well, they think there's a fourth plane, and it's on the mall, or it's heading down the mall. Well, it happened to be a CIA plane that was unmarked that nobody really knew about, but it was scaring everybody. And so we were whisked out. Everybody was moved out of the Capitol. I was whisked out. I was in the back of a black SUV and heading towards the backside of Washington out to Andrews Air Force Base. And at Andrews Air Force Base, I finally, got a hold of Vice President Cheney. He told me that almost every plane in the United States, in United States air territory, was down, landed, and all over the northern Atlantic, over the North Pacific, down through the Caribbean, so planes, international flights as well. But he said there's 3 planes still coming across from Europe that don't have the transponders on, and there's a plane, a KAL flight coming across from Korea across Canada that didn't have the transponders on, and they're trying to get those planes down because they certainly don't want to shoot them down. And I thought, wow. And he said, you're going to go into an undisclosed location. And I said, okay. So the next thing I know, I was in a helicopter flying across the south part of Washington, looking down, nothing moving on the streets, everything just dead still. And then I crossed Reagan International Airport, and I'm looking down out of that helicopter, and planes are just piled up on the tarmac, and not enough gates for all the planes, and you can see that nothing moving, just dead. And I look out of the other side of the helicopter, and there's the Pentagon. and this blue-black smoke, and it's a beautiful, crisp September morning, but this blue-black smoke is just belching up out of the Pentagon with these dark orange flames pushing it up from underneath. And I'm thinking to myself, I taught history. I was a school teacher, taught history for 16 years, and taught about the British invading the United States capital just 200 years ago in 1814. And that, our country was at war, and I'm thinking, this is the same thing has happened. We are at war. We don't know with who or what for or how, but this country, our freedom is in jeopardy. Now I'm thinking, how will this day change the history of this country? Well, we proceeded on to an undisclosed location, and ultimately that day, the president of the Senate showed up, and the Republican leader in the Senate appeared, and my counterpart on the Democrat side, Dick Cavart from the House of Representatives, was there along with
Robert Henry Lynch, Jr.
Sean P. Lynch.
Sean Patrick Lynch.
Terrence M. Lynch.
Michael J. Lyons.
Monica Ann Lyons.
Nahaman Lyons IV.
Patrick John Lyons.
Robert Francis Mace.
Mary Ann McFarland.
Jan Masiewski.
Susan A. Mackey.
William Macco.
Catherine.
On the right, the reading of names of 9/11 victims in New York. On the left, former House Speaker Dennis Hastert, who was third in line, second after the Vice President in the presidential line of succession on September 11, 2001. Let's resume listening to his remarks for just a moment. And by the way, in a moment, we'll be talking live with Virginia Congressman Jerry Connolly. But first, back to Shanksville.
And I remember chills going down my spine and thinking, this country will be okay. We'll stand shoulder to shoulder and we'll get through this. And I will always remember every time that we went through the next 9 months, there were a lot of things that Congress had to do. We had to create a special kind of insurance to get airplanes to fly again, anti-terrorism insurance. We had to create an insurance so we could build buildings and repair the damage in New York and also in the Pentagon. And all those things were new. We created the act, the Patriot Act, so that we could find out who those people were that were ingrained in our country, that we could find them and stop any new type of occurrence. We had over 3,000 families that we had to make sure that there was support for, and we set aside $21 billion to take care of all those issues that we had to, and we had to make sure that there was a special court system so people wouldn't have to go and sue the airlines or stand in line and wait to get their remuneration or the support for their families. All that was happening in the next 9 months of Congress, and it was an amazing time of bipartisanship and people working together. Every night, I remember in my office, we had the leadership in both the House and the Senate working out this legislation so we could move forward. But for the next 6 years that I was Speaker, I would walk into my office and stand at my desk and look down that mall. And I would think of that day when I stood and watched that smoke curl across the mall of the Capitol of the United States. And I think of all the heroes that we have in this country, certainly the heroes that wear the uniforms of our service, the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and the Coast Guard. And certainly those people who wore the uniforms of the firemen who went up the stairways of the World Trade Towers, and the police who lost their lives, and the emergency service workers that were there to help and take care of people. Great heroes. But I always think of the heroes that we don't know about, that don't wear uniforms, that happen to be sitting down a row, 2 or 3 seats from us on an airplane, or the people who are across the room. But when something happens, when the call comes, those people stand up and do what they have to do. And, you know, we don't know if there were 4 or 7 or 5 or 8 people who took along with the crew and the passengers of Flight 93 with a couple pots of scalding water from the coffee maker and the utensils that they had left from breakfast serving, took down the 4 terrorists of that plane. They knew that that plane had turned around. They knew that it was headed for Washington, D.C. They knew that would happen in the World Trade Tower because they had the earphones. They were talking back to their families and their offices. They knew what happened in the Pentagon. And they, with their courage and their strength, took down that plane. Today we know because of the Moussaoui hearings that that plane was probably headed for the capital of the United States. And ironically, at the time that I was sitting there pondering whether we should, you know, close down Congress or evacuate or bring in the chaplain or say a prayer, if it wasn't for those heroes on that plane who are consecrated here in this hillside, probably the capital of the United States would have been the target and destroyed by that terrorist act.
The former House Speaker of the United States, Dennis Hastert, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, part of our live continuous coverage of the 9/11 observance here on News Channel 8.